Should you apply to business schools in round 1 or round 2? Hi, I'm Chauvin. I'm a recent Michigan Ross alum, class of 2020. Now, round 1 versus round 2 is a pretty big decision for most MBA applicants. And I remember from my time, it was a big decision for me too. So I wanted to get to the bottom of this and create the ultimate round 1 versus round 2 video. Now, you will get to hear from admission directors from schools like Harvard, Darden, Ross, MIT, HEC, ESA, UCLA, and many others. You can click on the video chapters to quickly jump to the MBA program you are applying to. You can also check what admission consultants had to say at the end of this video. Good luck with your applications.
Darden has 4 rounds of admission. We have an early action round in September, round 1 in October, round 2 in January, and round 3 in April. There are some slight differences to those rounds. So in our early action round in September, it's an opportunity for an open interview. And so for those who apply by that deadline, they can schedule their own interview with our Darden team, which is a nice opportunity. The rest of our rounds are interview by invitation only. So that's one of the perks of applying a little bit early to the program. And then in terms of round 1 versus round 2, or just generally round versus round, my best advice is to apply in the earliest round when your application is ready. So if you're not ready by September, that's okay. Apply in October. If you're not ready by October, that's okay. Apply in January. But I would encourage you to apply as early as possible. Think about it. If we've got, let's say, the Darden class is an empty auditorium. We've got 345 seats in that auditorium. After early action, we filled up a few rows of that auditorium. After round 1, we filled up more of that auditorium. And so, each progressive round, the class is more full. And so it's by that nature, it's going to be more competitive for the remaining seats in the auditorium. So that doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of seats available and that you're not going to get one of them. It just means that there's fewer in total than there were, back when the auditorium was completely empty. So hopefully that illustration kind of explains, maybe some of the advantages of considering applying a little bit earlier in the season as well.
These past 2 years have been sort of different, right? Last year was crazy with the pandemic hitting, and our round 3 looked totally different. Mm-hmm. This year was really a competitive year. There was more pent-up demand, right, because of all the shifts. And so this year was really different. In normal years, I tend to say there's not a big difference between applying between 1, 2, and 3 because we admit through all of those rounds. Mm-hmm. And my advice is always to apply when you feel most ready. Mm-hmm. That being said, when application volume, starts creeping up and you see competition creeping up and a lot of really high quality candidates, mm-hmm. round 1 and round 2 are really competitive. And by the time you get to round 3, it just means there's fewer seats that are actually available, especially if those first 2 rounds were competitive and people accepted the offer at a high rate. So I always tell people, try to plan ahead. If you're on a call and talking today, you already know that you're kind of interested in doing an MBA. So I would encourage you to plan for round 1 or round 2. If life is happening and you don't submit in round 2, you can still apply in round 3 and we admit from round 3. It's just, that's the most difficult round, I would say. Scholarship is tricky. It's a set budget, right? So we have a set amount of money and we will award in round 1 and we predict kind of, we have models and use tools to try to help us predict how much we think we should spend in round 1 and what our yield will be and then what we have for the rest of the other rounds. And it's human choice. So it's not always the most predictable. I mean, it is, but if you're really wanting to be most competitive for scholarship, that would be round 1. Round 2, there's going to be a little bit less money. And by round 3, most all that money is going to be gone. So I think you just have to think about, you're applying to a lot of different schools. You have to do the pros and cons of who am I applying to round 1 and what are my chances of gaining admission? What's happening in round 2? And you just have to weigh all of those things. And to be honest, if people are applying to 5 programs in round 1, that's a lot of work. Sometimes you can tell when applications just come through and they're a little bit rushed, or you've left other school names in. It doesn't mean we're not going to take you, but it does impact your chances because it's a rushed application. So you, as an applicant, you have a lot of conflicting priorities and things to balance out. You just have to kind of figure out how to best spend your time.
There truly is not a difference in terms of our eyes. And so please apply to the round that you feel like you're best suited to apply for. For me, I was a round 2 applicant because I needed that kind of full time in terms of what I was balancing with work. And so do whatever is kind of best suited to you and your schedule and what your kind of year is looking like. It really does not matter from the application or the admissions perspective.
Yeah, and I would just add, definitely apply when you're ready. That's the most important piece. But also from the financial aid lens, there is also no difference in your eligibility for financial aid. We actually don't award financial aid till after round 2. We'll certainly give estimates so you have an idea of what you're eligible for before making a decision. But there's no difference between round 1 and round 2. We're not running out of funding or anything like that.
When we talk about round 1, we're talking about September. When we talk about round 2, we're talking about early January. Either of those rounds are completely fine. And in fact, we know that candidates are going to apply heavily across both of those rounds. So it doesn't make sense for us as an admissions team to go too hard in round 1, pick up too many candidates, give out too many scholarship dollars, and then not be able to get maybe some great candidates from round 2. Okay, so we have a lot of data over a lot of years that helps us understand kind of what the patterns are likely to be from applicant behavior. So between rounds 1 and 2, I would apply when you think your application is at its strongest. Rounds 3, like a little bit later, so now you're talking about schools that have application rounds in March or April. That's a little late. At that point, you've had people from rounds 1 and 2 largely accept or not accept your offers. And so there are slightly fewer options a little bit later in the year. And as an international student, let's say, it's less time to get your visa too. So we let people in the later rounds all the time. We wouldn't have them if we, weren't going to admit people that late. We also save some spots there too. It's just a smaller number. So if you can apply by rounds 1 or 2, that's the best. Something to keep in mind as you figure out which schools you're going to apply to in which rounds. Okay. If you apply to a school in, let's say, September, you're going to find out in December that you were admitted, and you probably have to put down a pretty substantial deposit by February. And I mean like probably $2,000 or so by February. If you apply to schools in round 2, so you apply in January, you're not even going to find out that you've been admitted until March. So your round 1 school is going to need that $2,000 from you before you hear back from your round 2 schools. So I would consider applying to the schools that you plan to apply to in the same round so that you have a similar decision time set to be able to make that choice with comparing all available options. Now, you might get waitlisted. And if you get waitlisted, you actually get evaluated in the subsequent rounds. So if you apply in round 1, you get evaluated again in round 2. If you apply in round 2, you get evaluated again in round 3. And so that would be the one caveat. You won't find out on the same timeline if you're waitlisted, of course. But all things being equal, applying in the same round is a good idea. So you don't have to put down $2,000 just to wait for your option to hear back from your round 2 schools.
There's no real benefit between round 1 and round 2 because we'd really prefer that you submit an application that you think is putting your best foot forward. But it's a numbers game, right? And what happens is we're going to start building a class in round 1. We will never fill a class in round 1. We meet amazing people in round 2 and we meet amazing people in round 3, though by the time we get to round 3, we're going to have fewer and fewer seats available. Before COVID-19, we had really nice algorithms that helped us predict these how to build a class. I think like all companies and businesses, those are kind of out the window. And so we're relearning how to predict that, but we would never fill a class in round 1. And we would never fill a class in round 2. We want to make sure that we get a chance to meet everyone in all 3 rounds. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 3 rounds. It's a little bit more cut and dry when it comes to fellowship. We do separate out fellowship by round so that we do have that opportunity to make those fellowship awards in each round. And so it depends on sort of what the pool looks like and how we're making decisions. But we would, again, never give all the fellowship awards out in round 1 and have nothing to award in round 2 or even in 3, though it's like building with Legos. You kind of run out of space as you get to round 3.
If you apply in round 1 or round 2, the chances of admission, the quality of the application pool, the opportunities for funding as well, which I know isn't part of this question, but I'll just add, are almost identical. They're very, very similar. There's no distinguishable difference between round 1 and round 2 for us. What I will say is, if you're applying for regular admissions, round 3 is the year where year to year there's some variance. And that's because it's not exactly 50-50, but like we intend to admit and enroll about half of our class in round 1, about half our class in round 2, and then depending on what happens throughout that year and changes in the market that lead to enrollments not meeting that goal, influences our round 3 number, so we can get our full class. So round 3 is always subject to the outcomes of other pieces. Round 1, round 2, nearly identical.
A strong application is always going to stand out. So whether it's round 1 or round 3, you're going to want to submit when you feel most confident in your essays, your resume, your test score, the story you're telling. If you look at by numbers, it's still about the same. It's still pretty similar in terms of acceptance rate. The major difference is, round 1 is, as I spoke about earlier, is, no one's taken a seat. We haven't given out any scholarship funding. Obviously by round 3, you hope that, you've done your best to kind of yield as many people as possible. And so now it just becomes, what is the space available for round 3?
And I think there are personal advantages to applying earlier than later. So for example, if you apply round 1, then you're going to hear a decision before people who apply in round 2. And so for example, if you are coming into the MBA program with a family or an employer that wants to hear advance notice, then this gives you a chance to plan earlier, that if you know that you're going to go into the MBA program. I know that if I compare myself, who I received my decision round 2 versus someone I know who heard his decision later, his almost sounded like it was much more stressful, and I was able to at least take some time to travel and get situated in Austin.
It's better to apply earlier than later. It's always better to apply earlier. I think that this is the kind of the bottom line. However, I think it's actually better to apply when you have the best application, right? I don't think that, especially between round 1 and round 2, to be very honest, we peak on round 2. So round 1, usually, like if you apply, it's going to be nice because it's less people applying. You're probably going to have a better service from the admissions team. But I think that in terms of round 2, because we peak on round 2, if you are applying round 2, I think it's still okay, right? If I wouldn't rush to apply in round 1 if you're not going to have an amazing application that you could have in round 2. Right? I think that it's true that every round we are poorer in terms of scholarships, right? So in the beginning of the year, the admissions committee is feeling very rich and scholarships tend to be a bit fatter. And then as we progress, we feel poorer and poorer. And then the scholarships tend to decrease a bit the size, right? So I feel that this would be the biggest, but we still have a lot of money for round 2 as well. So again, I wouldn't rush to apply in round 1 if you're going to be better in round 2, maybe with a better GMAT, with better essays. So I wouldn't rush, to be honest.
It's always best to apply when you feel most ready to. There's no point in applying in round 1 if you're not able to bring together a high quality and authentic application that captures your leadership and your impact. And in my personal experience, there's no difference. So really it's all about when you feel most ready to apply. And for some folks, round 1 is when they've had the time to really put in that reflection and put together an application that reflects all of their achievements. And for others, that could be round 2, and that's totally fine.
It's very important to apply when you feel like your application is the strongest. The worst thing you can do is try to rush it and say, I got to apply in round 1, because truthfully, there are more openings because we haven't admitted anyone yet. But if you put forth a rushed application, it's not going to do a service to you at all. So I would say that round 1 and round 2 is our largest round. So they're pretty comparable if you have a strong application. And so I always say that if you need to take the exam again in order to get a stronger score, If you need to work on your essays a little bit longer, then you should do that and apply in round 2. I would say that financial aid is a bit stronger if you apply earlier. That's something to think about. But rounds 1 and round 2, I would say you want to just be sure that you have your strongest application.
So the biggest difference would be in terms of your opportunity to connect with the incoming student community and the overall community as an admitted and incoming student. So part of that is getting your decision back, making your commitment to the school means we can go ahead and connect you with our career management center, the rest of the current students, all those sorts of things. So certainly if you know you're planning, if you know you're very interested in Grace Meta, it's a wonderful opportunity to go ahead and get that application in and get your decision back. Otherwise, in terms of likelihood of admission, there is not a difference between round 1 and 2. It's more about your readiness to get everything in. And if you do feel that applying in round 2 would make a significant difference in the strength of your application, that's the reason. If someone were concerned about that, they certainly could wait until round 2.
I can't stress enough that you should apply when you have your best application ready. So it's not going to help you to rush your application for round 1 if you know there's something that you really need to work on. That being said, you know, I recommend applying to round 1 or round 2. Round 3 is definitely much more competitive. We typically see our largest round with round 2. But we, of course, admit people from all rounds. So again, you just want to put together your strongest application. And if you're wondering about anything, if you have a concern and you're wondering maybe about your undergraduate GPA, maybe it wasn't as strong as you would have liked, and you're wondering how you can address that, or you're wondering, should I take an exam again? You know, reach out to us, because we are happy to have a conversation with you and help you put together your best application. So there isn't a right answer when it comes to the round. It really depends on where you are in preparing your application. What I would just say is, don't feel like you have to rush.
The short answer is there really is no difference. Like I said, we want you to wait to apply until your application is the strongest that it can be. And if that means waiting to round 2 or even the 3rd deadline or the 4th deadline, then I encourage you to do that. There really is no difference at Stern. We accept applicants off of all of the deadlines. So just wait to apply until your application is as strong as it can be.
Technically, there is no difference between round 1 and round 2, except for one thing, that in round 1, we have 100% scholarship opportunities available. In round 2, there won't be 100%, but you'll have 75, 50, 25% of scholarships available. Now, from an operational point of view, logistics point of view, if you see why we have divided, applications into different rounds, is because we receive tons of applications. Now, if all those applications we are to evaluate in a single go, in just one go, operationally, we won't be able to conduct so many interviews. So that is why we have divided into 2 rounds, so that operationally it is also, feasible for us. Plus, we also do justice to candidate results as well. Otherwise, the results will also take a long time to be announced.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of studies on this and looking at different data points in previous years. And round 1 and round 2 really is a level playing field. Round 3 is the competition, where seats are filled up from round 1 and round 2. And typically we only have about maybe 20 slots left by the time round 3 comes around. So it's not that the metrics got bigger, right? It's not that they got harder. It wasn't all of a sudden like we were only looking at 780 GMATs, right? Because that's not true. It was just more so there's only 20 spots left, a couple hundred applications, where your chances just become less at that point.
We're kind of an a-traditional business school in that we have rolling application deadlines. So we have an application deadline every month. So you can apply each month for the intake of your choice. Of course, I would suggest, in the first 6 months would be a good idea, 6 months prior to the next intake, because if you leave it till the last minute, you have less time sometimes to celebrate, to plan your visa, depending on where you're joining from. And also this year, unfortunately, or fortunately, our class filled up quite early. But this is a conversation you can have with your recruiting and marketing manager. So once you fill out the Connect form, you could say like, okay, I'm thinking of applying this month, or can I wait till the next month, or I'm targeting this intake, and you can have this really, honest, genuine conversation.
I would just add that chances for admission and scholarship are the same when there's a round, but we do fill up the intakes as we move through the calendar year. So that's kind of what Sarah hinted at in terms of applying sooner than later. But I would say, indeed, get in touch with your dedicated marketing and recruitment manager, because it's always applicable to your own personal situation. We don't want you to rush an application if it means compromising on the quality that your application may have. So we do want you to build the strongest profile possible and be in the best position to successfully go through our application process.
If you put yourself in the admissions officer's shoes, and this is something I teach throughout Applicant Lab, right? One of the big things I teach is not like some sort of magical secret and abracadabra incantation. I'm basically teaching you how to put yourself in an admissions officer's shoes in order to think about like, well, what are they looking for? What do they want? And one of the things that you want to think about is like, okay, if I'm an admissions officer, sure, I could fill the entire class with just people from McKinsey, Bain, BCG. Or I could fill the class with just people from Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, whatever. The problem though with that is that the conversations would be super boring and no one would really learn from anyone else because you'd just be surrounded by the same people you've already been surrounded with for the past 2 to 4 years. So a lot of learning wouldn't happen. So you want that diverse class in terms of professional background so that the conversations are really cool. And if you, as an admissions officer, if you happen to know that most of the go-getters from the overrepresented groups are going to apply in round 1, it's human nature that you're going to be a little bit more likely to admit them in round 1 because that's when they're arriving. It's kind of like a circular, self-fulfilling prophecy. Think about a time, maybe you've had someone junior at your job, right? Let's say you were managing a team of software engineers and a junior engineer wrote some code and it's sloppy and it's not documented. There are no comments inside and there's some bugs in there. And they're like, oh yeah, I worked really hard on this. This is everything I've got. You're going to be like, no, it's not. Come on. I was in your shoes once. I know what good code looks like. You did not work hard on this, right? It's the same thing with them. They can tell. They've been doing this. Many of them have been doing this for many years. They can tell when your essay has been completely half-assed. These people are very smart. And there's a reason why. Let's think. Why would the round 1 deposits be before the round 2 decisions? I wonder, is it because that extra 6 weeks of cash flow makes a huge difference in the financial position of the school? I mean, they have zillion-dollar endowments, but that $2,000 deposit, they are counting on that by February. They really need it. Is it that they really need the money by February? They can't possibly wait until April or May? Or is it that they're smart and they know that maybe you applied to some other schools in round 2? Maybe you're waiting to hear back from them. So why not make that deposit deadline a little bit early? Put your money where your mouth, you are literally putting your money where your mouth is, right? Because for all the essays, you're like, your school's my favorite school. And then you turn to the other school and you're like, you're my favorite school. Actually, you're my favorite school. And so then if you get into some of them, it's like, well, guess what? If we're your favorite school, like you said in your essays, why not pay us the $2,000? There's a reason why Columbia Business School has I think it's a $6,000 deposit for its early decision round. They know that maybe you might be applying to other schools. Yeah, I know you're not supposed to, but they know that maybe you are. And so they figure, why not extract a pound of flesh from you in the process? So really think about the logistics of these deposits. If you don't have like $2,000, just kind of, look, here's a little pile of money right over here in my living room. It's $2,000. Woo! Like if that's not you, I really want you to think carefully about when you apply so that you don't find yourself in a painful situation.
It's fairly standard advice to apply in round one, if at all possible. The logic here is pretty simple as well. In round one, none of the programs have seats that have been taken yet. If there are, say, 600 seats in the program and 200 are taken after round one, then there are just simply less available spots left over in round two or round three. Of course, programs don't fill up their entire class during the first round, but there are likely several admittable applicants in round one that were put on the wait list. So when round two rolls around, every round two applicant is competing against not only the round two applicant pool, but also the waitlisted applicants, many of whom have already been deemed admittable. So just, you know, some general kind of guidance on why round one is better than round two. However, you don't need to apply in round one, and programs do actually accept people in round two and round three. So if you can't apply during round one, then absolutely round two or round three are still available for people to apply, and it should be an option. I'm going to just walk you through a very simple exercise here. Don't worry, you don't have to take home, you know, homework or considerable notes, but I do encourage you, just get out a notepad or just get something out that you can jot down your answers as I walk through this exercise. And hopefully you can make your decision afterwards as to whether round one is the best option for you or round two. There are two primary questions that I'm gonna walk you through. One is, are you a strong applicant? And then the second is, will your applications be strong? So in the first question, you really want to look at applying when you're the strongest applicant. And to assess this is where I want you to write down your answers. I'm going to ask you some questions. Write down a yes or a no as I ask the following questions. So the first one, is your test score, your GMAT or GRE, within the 80% range of your target programs? Are you prepared for the quantitative rigor of the MBA? Are your English language skills strong enough to be an active participant in class? Do you have at least 2 years of work experience that demonstrate progress and contribution over time? Do you have functional skills or industry knowledge that will allow you to contribute to the class or group projects? So with all those questions, if you answered no to any of these questions, you probably shouldn't be applying round one. In this case, assess and put together an action plan to ensure you're competitive in your target programs when you are ready to apply. However, if you did answer yes to all these questions, then let's move on to the second section of questions. And to answer the second main question, which is, will your application be strong? And so we're now sitting at a date, it's middle of August almost. Are you going to be able to submit your strongest application or a strong enough application to gain admittance in round one? So here are the questions. Number one, if you're a strong applicant, then have you started your online application for every program you want to apply to? Have you entered your recommenders' contact info into the application and provided them guidance on what to expect and when it's due? Do you have your undergrad and any other transcripts ready? Have you filled the bulk of the info in the online application? Have you revamped your resume so that it's up to date and it fits on one page? Can you clearly articulate why an MBA in 30 seconds for an elevator pitch, a short answer, or a 500-word essay? This is an important one too. Does your short-term post-MBA goal include industry, function, geography, and a few target companies that you have in mind? Have you attended events such as webinars, coffee chats, virtual tours, class visits, etc., for each program you're applying to? Have you engaged with students and/or alumni to identify resources you want to leverage in each program and planned for how you can also contribute to the program's community? Do you have at least one person lined up to review your application materials? If you answered yes to all these questions, you're ready for round one. If you have more no's than yeses, then round two may be a better time for you to submit. There are a few caveats, however, and ultimately, keep in mind, this is a personal decision. You're better off submitting a strong round two application than a poor or even an average round one application, especially at top programs that are ultra competitive. So if you have a few no answers, but most were yeses, then consider prioritizing programs you should apply to in round one. Perhaps focus on those deadlines in October so you have a little bit more time to give yourself for writing essays, for giving your recommenders an opportunity to complete powerful recommendations. Or if you're working on improving test scores, you might submit applications in round one to a few programs that have a lower overall average test score. while also planning to retake the GMAT or GRE a little bit later, say October or November or even early December. And if that score is stronger, then you can apply at that point to some of the programs that have a higher overall test score. I hope this was helpful. And I'll conclude by just saying this. Try to submit in round one if you're a strong applicant and you can submit a strong application. However, if you just can't submit applications in round one, then the next best time to submit is round two.
I get this question from my clients a lot. Is it better for me to apply in round one or round two? And the general answer I give them is that the two rounds are roughly equal, in that most business schools admit a similar proportion of candidates in round one versus round two. So my biggest piece of advice is apply when you're fully ready. And that means that you have completed your school research and you can articulate your fit for each program to the admissions committee. You've ironed out your short and long-term goals. You have a test score in hand that you feel fully reflects your ability, and you have your recommenders lined up. And overall, you feel confident that you can put together a well-executed application, including thoughtful essays. And so if you can do all of that by the round one deadline, that's great. And if you apply by round one, you'll get a decision by the end of the calendar year. But if you feel like you need more time to get more of these elements to be as strong as it can be, then by all means apply in round two. It's far better to wait and apply with a higher quality application than it is to rush through the applications for the sake of applying in round one. But there are a couple of special cases that I'd like to touch upon. One is for applicants who are considered heavily represented in the application pool. And so a few examples of that are, one, finance professionals, particularly males in investment banking and private equity. Business schools see a lot of people from that background. They also see a lot of consultants, those who work at McKinsey, BCG, Bain, or other firms such as PwC and Deloitte. Business schools also see a lot of applicants from India and China, in particular, a lot of Indian male engineers who work in information technology. So when I speak to candidates who are from one of these heavily represented backgrounds, what I tell them is, if you can apply to at least a few of your programs in round one, I think that would really be to your benefit. Because in round one, nobody's been admitted yet. The field is wide open. By round two, inevitably, there's going to be bankers and consultants in the class. And it's not as though business schools have a quota for certain groups or anything like that, but they are challenged with building a diverse business school class. So in that case, it is better to lean towards round one. But at the same time, the same rule applies about preparedness. If you are in one of those categories, but you really need more time to make sure your application elements are as strong as can be, then it might still be better to apply in round two when you can ensure that your application is as high of quality as possible. I also wanted to talk about reapplicants. So those who are applying to business school after being denied admission the year before or the year before that. If reapplicants apply in round one, that's a great way to signal strong interest to the admissions committee. But at the same time, what admissions committees look for in reapplicants is growth since the last time they applied. And in fact, most applications ask reapplicants, in which ways have you grown since you last applied to our program? And so if they want to apply in round one, reapplicants want to make sure that they can demonstrate growth in certain areas, perhaps a higher test score, increased responsibilities at work, more detailed knowledge of the program and how it'll help them meet their goals. And so if they can have those elements together for round one, then that would be preferable. But at the same time, if they feel that they need more time to show significant growth since their last application, then it would be better to apply in round two with a higher quality application. That would help increase their chances. And finally, candidates should just consider their schedule. When do they have time to put together high quality applications? If they're expecting a very busy summer, then it could be tough to get things together by the round one deadlines, especially the earlier ones. But if they're expecting a very busy holiday season, the end of year holidays, then they would want to consider front loading their work to meet the round one deadlines. And of course, round one and round two are not mutually exclusive. Candidates don't have to pick one round or the other. In fact, most who apply to more than a few business schools are going to be applying to some programs in round one and some programs in round 2. And as they think about how to split up that list, some factors they're going to want to consider are which business schools are the most important to them, based on the criteria that they're using to evaluate their choices, which schools are the most competitive, and which schools are they going to be able to put together high quality applications for, considering the application's length and their requirements. And so those are the things that I would consider if I were trying to decide whether to apply in round 1 or round 2, or of course both.
So first of all, when should you apply? You want to apply when you have confidence that you're ready to submit the strongest application possible. I can't emphasize this enough, but I know you've heard about this from other admissions directors, so we'll go on to a little bit more. So first of all, acceptance rates are similar across rounds, but some schools actually do favor round 1. Let's give some examples. Columbia Business School. So Nicole Shea is on our team. She spent the last 6 years in the admissions office at Columbia. And when we talk about Columbia, they're rolling. So the sooner the better to submit the applications. Now, of course, if you're going to have, let's say, 40 points higher on the GMAT, or maybe even 30 points, depending on the situation, it's better off waiting, right? If you have a 700 GMAT today and you're going to get a 750 GMAT by January, I'd rather have you wait until January to apply. However, the sooner the better, especially if you're applying through early decision. MIT Sloan is another example where round 1 is just better than round 2. And sometimes if you talk to schools, you won't hear these exact details, but what we've seen over time is that it's a little bit better to get in the earlier rounds rather than later. And I know you've heard from Katie and some other folks about, applying sooner is really better than later. But for us, we really see an advantage in applying earlier than later for at least those 2 schools. Now, take a school like Chicago Booth, very little difference across the rounds in most years. One thing about today versus, let's say, some other years is you have to think about where you are. How does COVID play into this, right? So some years round 3 doesn't exist, essentially, and very hard to get in. Some years they have to take a lot of folks in round 3, depending on the situation. We are forecasting a slightly more competitive round 2 than round 1 relative to most years, just because things started out a little bit slower. And as people become more comfortable with going to school and see how school is happening in these times, I think more people will be applying in round 2. So some other things to think about, right? If you're a reapplicant and you want more time to show career progression, round 2 might make sense for you. If you have recently switched a job, then you might want to think about round 2, right? You want to have a certain number of months in a job. I usually like to say at least 6, but okay, this varies quite a bit. Maybe 2 or 3 would be enough in your situation. But let's say you just recently moved, jobs, maybe it's good to show some leadership and some progression at the job. Of course, if you're looking to improve the scores, we already talked about this. And then just frankly, if your apps aren't strong enough, I don't know exactly when this video is going to be aired, but it's early August. We are still taking folks for round 1. We're doing some rush round 1 packages, but frankly, if you're starting late and you just don't have enough time to perfect yourself, then maybe you need to be waiting until round 2. Some other factors to keep in mind. If you target round 1, right, you'll have extra time if your apps aren't ready. What does this mean? Well, this means if you end up being slower than you think you want it to be, and you need extra time, that's fine if you apply round 1. But if you apply in round 2 and you're targeting January, and then all of a sudden you're not ready in time, well, then you have to wait until the next year. Of course, there are certain programs where, to be frank, round 2 slots might be a little bit limited. And then there are other programs, like let's say if you're applying across the pond and you're looking in Europe, a lot of folks who apply in Europe just aren't really ready for round 1. So, round 2 is a perfectly fine round. A lot of people apply in January. If you're applying to London Business School, a lot of the Brits end up just not getting it in until the round 2 anyway. And then many, many applicants apply across both rounds. So sometimes I hear clients think about, well, I need to get it done by the first round, or I need to figure out if I'm doing round 1 or round 2. You don't need to decide either of those things. You could just start working and see where you get. maybe you'll only get 2 or 3 schools done in round 1, and then you'll do another 3 or 4 schools in round 2, and that's totally fine. You can split across the rounds. Just be ready that you might have to put down a little deposit if you do apply and you get into a school, and then they might need you to deposit to hold a slot before you get to your round 2 applications. What else can I say about round 1 versus round 2? First of all, I think it depends. I guess not first of all, but it depends where you're coming from. So if you are a consultant, and a lot of consulting firms send folks in the first round, that might be something to consider. If you're in military, don't worry about it. We have a lot of military folks that are applying in round 3. Rounds really won't matter too much. So it depends where your competitive set is applying and how you want to sort of stand out against them. Another thing to think about is whether anything is really going to change about you at work. So maybe you have a big promotion coming up, and if you wait until the second round, you can really leverage that promotion.